What's going on, everybody? It's Patrick Dang here with the Parallax, and today I have a special guest, the CEO of Pixelmon, Giulio. How you doing today, man?
Hi, Patrick. Doing well. Thank you for having me.
All right. Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. A lot of people are very excited for this one because, as you know, Pixelmon is a pretty large brand and a lot of people are familiar with it. Just to give people context, like for you coming on the show today, what was your goal? What are you trying to help people see, or maybe,
As you know, Patrick, there's a lot of information out there about Pixelmon. And unfortunately, still most of it is tied to our history. So particularly to our reveal history and the characteristic images that came at that time. So what I'm trying to do, look, my objective is, first of all, to speak to as many interesting people in the space. I always get something out of it, such as yourself. But second to that, to put out there as much as possible, what is Pixelmon today? What are we doing? Because there's a lot we're doing. There's a lot we've executed. And it's really about creating awareness.
Okay, sounds good. I mean, that's good context. So I think in the beginning, like a lot of people want to know like who you are as a person, right? Because a lot of times for these projects, especially if they're doing something new, it's all about the leaders, who's really running it. And obviously you're the newly appointed CEO, right? Like what were you doing before this whole NFT and crypto wave came, just to give people your like business background?
Oh yeah, so I started in the most boring of boring. I started in M&A investment banking. Okay. I did that back in Europe. I was lucky enough that it was a time when there wasn't a lot of M&A going on because it was the end of the 2000s or before 2011-12 crisis. I jumped immediately from there to venture capital, and then from venture capital to venture building. I did a bit of work in Europe, was part of the founding team, not the founders per se, but founding team of a company called Westwing. That is a large home and living designer-wear e-commerce platform that IPO'd a few years later. Okay. But even Europe was a little bit saturated when it came to e-commerce. And I wanted to do e-commerce, and I moved to Southeast Asia. So in 2012, I moved to Southeast Asia, specifically to Singapore and Malaysia. And I spent the 9 years after that building a lifestyle e-commerce, which is the leading lifestyle e-commerce in 8 markets here in Southeast Asia. It's called Zalora. It was a journey of ups and downs, but we were lucky enough at the end of the journey, at least, or the end of the private company journey to IPO. We created a sizable company where we're quite proud of that. A couple of thousand employees, hit the 1 billion GMV mark. My passion, I realized, was in company building, entrepreneurship. It was not per se in the product we were selling. So it was not in fashion, beauty, home and living. And so with that IPO, I decided that another phase needed to start. After a few years of, let's say, the post-IPO journey, the consolidation, profitability, and ensuring you give to those investors, and this is very much a topic that is important also to Web3, but you give to those investors what you owe those investors. With that done, I decided to move to a new phase, which is the Web3 phase.
Got you. And then did you just feel like you're someone that just looks at the opportunity because you're a business builder, right? It's not necessarily the product itself, but creating a business, right? So like when you saw Web3, were you just like, this is the next opportunity that is going to be like big, or like how do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think, look, if I go back a couple of years, I was looking out there and saying in 2009, e-commerce was the thing. What is the thing? What is the next multi-billion industry? Really, 2 things were hitting completely out of context. But one was the large biomedical, biotech. And the second one was the blockchain and decentralized organizations decentralizing everything to scale everything. Topic. Amongst the two, just because of speed of implementation and speed of movement, blockchain one just stood out. If you want to build fast in biotech, there's still too much regulatory frameworks. It's not an industry where you build fast, you build quick. It's not an industry where you can disrupt change. While blockchain clearly was. And 2018, when I realized you need to wrap this chapter, make your investors happy, make your shareholders happy, ensure that your employees have a continued journey so the company is self-sustainable. But that's where your next journey is going.
So around, you said 2017, you were looking at crypto. Were you just like researching it online, or did you have friends who were like saying like, hey, you got to get into crypto? Like,
look, in 2017, it was impossible to avoid either of the two. No, everything was crashing in your face. I do admit and agree with some of the critics, especially in those times of the crypto ecosystem, that most of the information that was hitting you was tied not to the functional side of what you could do with the industry, but a lot more with amounts of profits
Yeah.
could make out of the
Very
industry.
profit driven. Correct. Yeah.
So I'll be very transparent. Most of the, let's call them friends or people that spoke to me about blockchain were just telling me, I bought a bunch of tokens in an ICO. They went up 500%.
And then I sold them.
And my question, being the boring company builder that I am, more than investor, or when I invest, I do angel investing. So I was, okay, who's behind it and what are they solving for? I'm not saying the industry didn't have that, but most of the people that were excited about the industry and speaking about the industry often couldn't answer that.
That's true.
Which was a little bit of a sign of, was raising some question marks. So I decided to dig in myself and spend good amount of my time understanding what does Ethereum actually solve for? It's not, I don't want to buy it today because it's going to be worth more than today tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's a great activity to do. And a lot of people did very well with it. But I want to buy it today because I believe in what it's going to do in 5 years' time. That required a lot more, let's say, the so-called going down the rabbit hole by yourself. That was not something that was so readily available as information. But as you dug, I think you truly start understanding the potential of it.
And then for, let's say, like NFTs, right? Because that's something that recently kind of became more of a phenomenon over the last year or two, exploding, just like how like crypto was in like 2017. Were you just watching this whole time and you just saw the opportunity, or like how did you think of NFTs when they started popping up?
Well, let me put it this way. If you dug, even in 2017, into what is actually blockchain going to solve for, very quickly, there were a few people writing, actually, their articles weren't coming up as strong, but there were quite a few people already writing back then about it, including Vitalik himself. You would stumble upon the concept of NFT, even if it's at times it wasn't even termed that way.
Yeah.
You would stumble upon the concept of unique contracts, of non-essentially non-large scale token systems that allowed for personalized and unique use cases by contract. While the technology to implement them and actually store that amount of information and move that amount of information wasn't ready, and particularly the platforms to create it and create it at scale, you're already starting to see some of the what would become NFT applications back then. Ultimately, I actually believe protocols or fungible tokens are the rails of the railway. NFTs are the trains. So ultimately, the vector is going to be the protocols, but the instruments of real change and application will be NFTs. And I'm talking about everything from decentralizing IP ownership across multiple industries to replacing standard contracts to replacing even property registers. Is what we're going to be able to do thanks to NFTs. And a lot of this was going on, and already there was a lot of talk about it. And frankly, it was where I was finding the most interesting pieces to read about blockchain applications. It is true that only though more recently we started seeing platforms that enabled large-scale use. Art as a first application. But then now, I would say around the first half of 2021, when they started going large scale, the gaming and metaverse applications.
Yeah.
And here we go into, maybe I'll let you ask your following question, but we go into why I decided to join that industry specifically.
Yeah. Actually, I do want to know. When I look at it, it seems like it's almost as if everything's kind of pushing towards the metaverse and gaming. That's where like a majority of the NFTs will probably be, is my guess, right?
Let's take us a few steps back now. We said decentralized applications, blockchain is what we want to be into. It's I kind of like decided that was going to be a game-changing and large enough to fail, but still win industry to move into, or large enough that you can't fail if you participate to it.
Large enough to fail. That doesn't make sense.
Then you move from there and you say, okay, so the real question with every industry, an emerging industry, is timing. Because you might believe that NFTs will replace the company register. You might believe that they will replace licensing. So we won't hold licenses in the future of trademarks. We will hold NFTs. I believe that. But is now the moment to launch a venture that will do that? Or is it too early to do that? So first, hyper large scale application of NFTs, maybe after art that we've seen, I believe it to be the virtual world. It's as if we're going to simulate what ultimately is going to happen in the real world with NFTs in the virtual world. That's why I ultimately decided that gaming was going to be the first massive scale application of blockchain technology to real lives. Because of speed in the curve of adoption, It's early enough. And this is just a nice cherry on the cake. The gaming industry is huge. It's bigger than the movie and music industry combined.
Yeah, and it's still growing too.
Yeah, and growing faster. And then gaming is fun. I've been a gamer myself since I was a kid.
Like, what kind of games are you like?
What do I play right now? Right now, I play very, very little in the last year and a half because I've had a young daughter, and that takes a lot of the air out of the room. But,
Sure.
But I still remember the very first Age of Empires was where I spent 30% of my childhood. Moved into anything ranging from the Grand Theft Autos to World of Warcraft. More recently, played a lot of, not Fortnite, but off my mobile, a very similar game called Free Fire.
Oh, yeah, I know that one. Yeah.
Also, not as passionate, frankly, about it, because I think I was already entering the professional years of my career, and you need a lot more time to become skilled at it.
So you have a pretty diverse experience with gaming. Okay.
Having to play at home sometimes and on mobile at other times when you're traveling gives you quite a diverse spectrum.
Before we go into like LiquidX and Pixelmon and all this stuff, one thing I do want to ask is, I saw on your Twitter PFP, you're using an Azuki. Like, a lot of Azukis also watch this channel, and they're probably curious to know, like, how'd you got into Azuki and stuff like that, and why'd you decide to like pick up a spirit?
The reasoning here is very different from the reasons that I would have picked up Pixelmon. Picking up Pixelmon or investing in another company is a process of looking at the business model. What can I create long term in terms of profit streams? How can I instrumentalize it? Azuki was a much more natural discovery, and frankly, it was the process of meeting a lot of their holders and their more passionate holders, particularly people from the Spirit DAO, whereby my decision ultimately was one driven by, okay, I've met a bunch of these guys. I spoke to a bunch of them, and this is a community I want to be part of. This is an ecosystem that I want to be exposed to. This is an ecosystem that is basically going to bring benefits intrinsic to itself, meaning the community itself gives value to the community.
Yes, I agree with that.
That value is very strong, and it's nearly independent from the underlying asset, brand, lore.
Yeah, it's like its own sub kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Correct. So then I basically went from there to asking these guys, okay, can you walk me through what we know about the lore? Can you walk me through around the key categories? Can I take a look at the art? And I must say the art is really nice. I mean, it's no case that we actually picked the lead artist for the avatar collection of Pixelmon, worked side by side with the Azuki artist for many, many years in Blizzard. That's because, frankly, I found I resonated with both art styles. So that was the path to that choice. And so far, now that I am in those groups, I've actually discovered that I had a lot of people that I already knew from the entrepreneur and Web2 entrepreneurship community in some of the groups. In some of the countries. Can't wait to have our first physical event with them as well.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I was just curious. Now we're going to dive into like Pixelmon and everything, right? So you're a part of the company LiquidX, right? For people that don't know, what is LiquidX? What are you in LiquidX? And like, how does that relate to Pixelmon?
I'm a co-founder of LiquidX, and LiquidX was in essence the vector that we, and by we I mean myself and a co-founder and a bunch of people that wanted to continue journey with us after our previous companies, created as the vector to enter Web3 gaming and IP ownership disruption. What we told ourselves is we have a very strong thesis, or at least we believe in that thesis strongly, which is the thesis that digital ownership disruption is the next wave of real functional benefits that NFTs will bring. The early adopters of this will be entertainment industries, first of all, gaming.
Okay.
With that thesis, we then said, do we come up with our own IP, for example, build our own game design concept? Or do we open ourselves to acquiring and developing existing IPs that have already received community validations, but in some cases either don't have the executional abilities or the funding to develop that roadmap, that plan, but a plan that is already endorsed. We decided for the latter. We decided for the latter because we actually realized out there's a lot of great concepts with strong community endorsements, but funding doesn't always find the best projects. And sometimes great concepts do not go hand in hand with great executional abilities.
Okay. What do you mean? Funding does not always find great projects. What does that mean?
What we had noticed is that there's sometimes a divide between the type of founder that is able to put together great communities and do a first initial mint, but then being able to raise additional funds does not go necessarily hand in hand with that. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of great concepts and IPs in Web3 that have done either a free mint or a mint in the range of, let's say, 1 to 2 million USD. So we're not talking about Pixelmon here. We're talking about smaller mints. Now, those smaller mints have great concepts, great communities, but find themselves very quickly realizing that there is a gap between what their vision is and what it requires to act in terms of funding to actually execute it.
Oh, yeah.
Versus what they've actually raised.
It's like usually costs way more than they anticipated.
Exactly. And finding and flanking those founders is valuable. I mean, that's an example of anime Metaverse for us and one of our first investments.
Okay.
The case of Pixelmon is different. I think in that case, funding did find.
Yeah. It did find. Yeah, sure.
Maybe that it went a little bit too much in the other direction, but executional abilities, or at least the maturity of those executional abilities, were not there yet.
Yeah, it's a big promise to build like the whole metaverse and all that stuff, right?
I always say, I think when we look at software development, and I've been in software development or applications of software development for now 12 years, there's really two types of software development paths. There is the one with hyper complex project management and product management requirements. And then there's the ones that actually instead require hyper skilled coding skills. And they nearly sit often on two different sides of a spectrum. I'll give you an example. One can develop a protocol or the underlying code base to a protocol or a smart contract by possessing very, very strong coding abilities, so development abilities, but very little project management abilities.
Okay.
It's kind of the example of I can write a great AI code by getting a super good developer and closing myself in a room for X days and coming out and here's a great product.
Yeah. Okay.
But a video game is actually exactly on the other side of the spectrum. You can have the best developers in the world, but without hyper complex project management, you won't be able to develop a game because the game is a merger of many, many, many elements in a complex ecosystem where no single hyper good at its job actor, coder, or skill set will compensate for lack of project management in the other pieces of the equation.
Sure.
I believe the early stage projects that Web3 had seen in DeFi were relying a lot on high quality development that required low project management weight. Gaming positions itself at the other end.
Yeah, it's like that meme of the super shadowy coder kind of thing, where they just like code and they just come out with some crazy thing, right? Which is totally different from like getting an art director, getting coders and everyone to build a game. I understand what you mean.
And it ends up, that's why it's a multi-year process versus a sprint.
Got you. Okay. So I'm curious, like when LiquidX was looking at Pixelmon, how did you guys say like, okay, this is the brand that we want to be a part of and this is what we want to build? Like of all the things that you could have chose, right? Because you have many options. Like why Pixelmon? Like especially because there was such a negative sentiment about it when it revealed.
I'll try and say it didn't happen that in such a structured way, but when we look back on it, I can really split the decision over 3 pillars. The first one being tactical. If you're building LiquidX as an organization that as a target has that of supporting founders in execution and proving that we can execute at high level, there is no better way to position yourself in that as being able to do that and get the reach and reputation of doing so than by turning around the project that nobody thinks can be turned around. So there is essentially a very high upside in proving this is what you're able to do. You want to prove you're a great boxer, you go in the ring and you fight the title holder. So if you want to be a turnaround and executional support player, you go in and you take on the hardest task.
Yes, it definitely is one of the hardest tasks. Yes, I agree with that.
The second layer it goes back to that mantra. So we believe that NFTs will disrupt IP ownership, IP creation, and that gaming and virtual worlds, in essence, will be first adopters.
Okay.
Now, within that, if you want to prove that at large scale, the first thing you got to do is find a use case of it, as in a game design concept that is large scale application of those principles enough or fits enough with those principles to actually be able to apply play to own UGC, user generated content at scale. the Pixelmon game design concept fitted perfectly.
Okay.
It fitted better than a lot of other game designs. So if you think about other game genres, from first-person shooters to non-creature hunting or training RPGs, anything else, it doesn't fit as well as the wish of collecting creatures that game genre establishes, and the need to constantly create new creatures that can be user-generated content and IP that game genre requires.
Gotcha.
Every game genre has constant innovation in gear and cosmetic assets. This game genre has that plus the creatures. And the creatures play a really important role in establishing why play to own should be valuable to a player and why creation of new assets for the game would be valuable for a creator.
Got you. And real quick, people have questions of like, so the original concept of Pixelmon was, it was kind of similar to Pokemon in a way where there's a trainer, you go out, you battle monsters, you capture them, you evolve them. So it's like the core concept of what people originally had in mind. Is that still going to continue as you guys run it?
Yes, because there's value to that. You call it the Pokemon concept, you call it the Digimon concept, you call it the Monster Hunter stories concept. There's value to that concept. The question is, where does the originality lie? The originality has to be embedded in. I believe, first of all, we're creating a world, we're not creating a game. This is one of the actual driving principles that we've got in our OKR sheets and project management documents. What does that mean? First of all, we create an IP that people need to be able to resonate with and immerse themselves in, because it has to stick. It's not just another game loop, but with blockchain integration. So Pixelmon World is a world where we put immense into world building and originality in that. And that originality goes everything from the design of the creatures to the personalities of the creatures to the names of the places to the concept behind the magic in the world, etc., etc. So from that point of view, we're working on the Silmarillion of Tolkien for the Pixelmon game. We're working on world building.
Okay, gotcha. Before we get into the world building, because I'm curious about that, a lot of people also asking on Twitter, the original founder, when he launched the project, obviously people were upset and everything like that. Actually, can you guys talk about that? Like, you acquired this company, or is he still involved? Like, I think people are a little unclear on what the situation is and how involved he is in now.
So in March, we initiated chats with him. It was just after the reveal. Towards the end of March, we realized it was an asset that we wanted to take a bet on. This said, we knew the paperwork would take some time to put together, a few months. But we also knew that the project didn't have a few months. Something needed to be done fast. And so I actually stepped in at the end of March, first week of April, on an undoxed basis, but before all of the paperwork was put through. So that was my first capacity on the project. So while we were working on a deal, I was working on trying to reassure the community that there was somebody else executing. In that period of time, while we were preparing the paperwork for an acquisition, the founder was working with me to refresh the art. And the founder took a direct involvement in the new art, high poly, that now you see on OpenSea. So he project managed that process with me. Once the acquisition went through, the founder stepped away from any operational role in the company. He's not involved operationally anymore. LiquidX acquired the company, which means it now has majority control and ownership over Pixelmon.
Gotcha.
There are other shareholders, which include financial investors and the founder himself that retains a stake. But most importantly, we are now actually also releasing a large employee stock option pool. So more than 15% of the company will actually be vested by employees over the next 4 years. This is important. It's a 4-year vesting. They actually have to create a product. They're not going to stick around for 6 months and get their shares. And those shares will only be liquid if we're very successful in doing what we want to do.
Got you.
Ultimately, LiquidX will own the majority. The employees will have the second biggest cut. And then there'll be financial investors and the founders retaining the remainder of the company. Got you.
And then the mint funds was minted before, right? So that all also transfers with the new company as well?
That was all part of the acquisition. We acquired the IP and 23,000 ETH plus whatever NFTs were in the vault of the company.
Okay, so now it's pretty much entirely under new management in terms of like an operational standpoint of like who's actually running it day to day?
Yeah, it's entirely under my leadership with the benefits and weight that carries. Yes.
Okay, so now that we covered that part, let's go ahead and get into the game itself, right? Obviously, when Pixelmon minted, the reveal was a little lackluster. I mean, it was kind of funny when they had like the Kevin and stuff like that, which was quite hilarious, right? So like with the whole refresh of the art, right? Can you talk to me about like who is doing the art? You mentioned earlier before that one of the artists that worked with the artist of Azuki is helping you guys out now, right?
So we've got 3 different pipelines on the art. Avatars, or we call them trainers, creatures, arguably the most important piece of the equation, and environment. The avatars and all of their gear, so swords, armor, skins, hair, whatever, is all being developed by Hong. Hong is the lead character artist for Blizzard. He develops essentially the characters in Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2. He has a company called Ultra Factory, and Ultra Factory is developing everything gear and avatar related to the Pixelmon game. Those avatars will be released in 3 weeks to our first holders. They will appear as PFP kind of cut on OpenSea, but they will actually be full body 3D rigged assets that holders will be able to download at source file level and animate themselves, etc., etc. Now, creature artists are very hard to come by. There's a lot of people that know how to do dragons, but people that know how to do dragons and everything else, and we've got 68 different species multiplied by 3 evolutions, so 200 Pixelmons just for our first generation. Not so many. So we are currently working with a studio based in Japan, whose leader is Cosmo Medias. Cosmo Medias has spent some time on YouTube as well with me walking for an hour and a half through the actual modeling and rigging process from a technical standpoint. Yes, Cosmo has the exclusive work with us for NFT creature art. Okay. It's important though to highlight that NFT creature art has 2 pipelines because we want to give our NFT holders super high poly, so super high definition creatures, but that super high definition would not render in game. Yeah. And it would slow down the game too much.
Because you got to play on mobile and everything, right? Yeah.
Correct. We actually have a separate pipeline that is called real-time retopology and the redevelopment of the creatures in becoming real-time assets. So assets that morph real-time with a processor and can adapt to the capacities of that processor. That is being developed by parallel studios that work together with Cosmo.
Okay, before we go with environment. So it's like the first studio, Cosmos, right? They create this high poly version, and then this other studio takes that high poly version and turns it into something usable in a game. Is that
correct? The first step is retopology. Retopology is basically the process of remapping the 3D asset from being a super high number of polygons. So imagine 3D art is ultimately about layering a map over any asset and then splitting that map into little triangles and the squares.
The polygons.
So angles. Each of which is a polygon. The process of retopology is one that takes us from the around 150,000 polygons that our NFT art has
it's a lot.
To 1/20th to 1/10th, which is what the game art operates on. And then re-rigs, so rebuilds the skeletons for it. And then working with our lore designers, so working side by side with our artists that understand the character of that specific Pixelmon, they design 10 to 15 animations per Pixelmon. So think running, walking, idle stance, dying, attack, defense 1, attack 2, attack 3, ultimate, flying. And those are very tied, particularly the attacks and defenses, to the character. You can't have a character that has an idle behavior or a defensive behavior, then jump around and perform massive attacks. So that rolls back to the world building side.
It all makes sense. And then the environment. There's another team for the environment.
Yes. So the environment is currently being developed by the in-house team. So that's where we're building more in-house capacity. And we're currently on the lookout. By lookout, I mean advanced stages of recruitment, offer hopefully going out this week for a art director in-house that is focused on environment. So think somebody who's built worlds in games that are famous for the look and feel of that world. Think Ubisoft. When I think beautiful worlds, I think Ubisoft.
Got you. A question I have is, I've never developed my game myself, so I'm curious. Like, if you have 3 different studios or 3 different departments that are running in parallel. Is it difficult to make sure the entire art direction is aligned? Because like you have this art director here, this guy's doing the environments and like
So game development, we were chatting about this earlier, is a project management nightmare. So because if you had one team do everything, first of all, you can't find really all the skill sets needed in one team. You wouldn't get high quality. Then you go to indie development, one team does everything. There's no creature expert. There is a 3D designer and he does everything. But because we're not indie, that's what AAA is about. It's about leveraging very different skill set and then project managing the complexity that derives from it. With quality comes complexity. There are two key factors to it. And I'm not saying we're great at it. I'm saying we're learning on it. Documentation. Okay. So a lot of documents. And in specific, what you've referenced now, the Art Bible would be the key document. An Art Bible is basically a huge set of slides, I think hundreds of them, that describes what the art direction visually and technically is. So what is the max number of polygons? What color palettes do we use? How do we position a Pixelmon in an environment? What kind of world is it? So it's an intersection of a concept artist, the lore writer, so the lead narrative guy, and the technical artists that prepare this huge document that then is used across different partners. And the second one is pure project management. So having producers. Now, the word producer is often mistakenly used in game development from outsiders of game development. But in essence, producing is connecting all these dots, connecting all of these different players, creating the same different pieces of the same product. Producers are essentially large-scale creative project managers. We've just onboarded a producer with experience in from Sony, so from the PlayStation ecosystem, with 20 years of experience. And we're growing our producer muscle every day.
Quick question on recruiting, actually, because like this is a Web3 business. In the gaming world, you know, there's some people with a negative stigma towards NFTs and Web3, right? So from your experience, is it like difficult to recruit at all? Or do you find that there's a certain type of person that's willing to or wants to make that jump and it's like easier?
There is a difficulty, but I think it's the kind of difficulty you simply need to accept. Essentially, there is a category of individuals that is ready and has somehow opened themselves up to the possibility of switching. And I wouldn't even call it switching. I would call it evolving, but they're not going to like that.
Yeah, that's a better word. Yeah.
From Web 2 to Web 3 game development. And another category that still hasn't. And frankly, this is very similar to 15 years ago, 12 years ago, I was trying to recruit people from offline fashion into online fashion. And it was very similar. There's people that have opened themselves to it and people that haven't. The truth is, what you need to do is you need to do very wide scale outreach. So cold messaging and connections. And then some will reply. You know what is the beautiful side of it is actually the ones that right now reply. I wouldn't say they're the smartest ones, but they're the ones that are the most entrepreneurially minded and have opened themselves to the possibility, have actually looked into the details of what Web3 can bring and NFTs can bring to gaming. The simple example is somebody whose wife or husband has done something in Web3 and has helped them understand it. And even if then they're a large senior art director in a AAA gaming company, even if they in their work environment there is still some stigma towards Web3 gaming, they've seen what is behind the curve. I think that the filtering mechanism does make it so that we have a smaller funnel of candidates, but a high quality one.
Yeah, because they're the only ones that would respond anyways, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. So just reaching out to them cold works. So you just go on LinkedIn. You're like, all right, let's find the senior director of whatever.
No, that's not all. So actually, we've got a few senior directors that way, but we've also what we do then is we're bringing on board advisors that are from the gaming world.
Oh, okay.
So the other angle here is find somebody that is very senior, connected, and has opened themselves to NFTs or Web3. Bring them on on your advisory board. They will help immensely, both because they will communicate trust to their own ecosystem. They'll make people think twice when they see that name there. And also because they'll make direct referrals and introductions.
Yeah.
They will also be very valuable into the interview pipeline because I've been in the gaming industry now for 9 months. I am not an expert by no means. So I need in my interview pipeline to know what good is. I need to flank myself with an executive that knows what good is.
Because I mean, people are probably curious about that actually. So like, you're 9 months into this whole gaming thing, right? And some people might say like, hey, this guy doesn't have gaming experience, right? From your perspective, because you're more like a business builder, an entrepreneur, like how would you respond to that? Because like everyone got to start somewhere, right? So like what do you think?
I mean, I get what they're saying. There are probably safer bets in betting on somebody who comes from the gaming world. I will also, though, say that traditionally, if you analyze industries, disruptors do not come from the industry. They come from outside the industry. I'm not saying there aren't cases, but it wasn't the retail folks that disrupted retail. It wasn't the doctors that created telemedicine. It wasn't a former NASA team that created SpaceX.
Yeah.
And this is a generalization. By no means I'm saying that people that are being in gaming cannot create great Web3 games. But typically, there tends to be an embedded way of doing things, let's say psychological limits that come from having spent a long time in an industry that might not make you see the borderless possibilities like an outsider does. So as an investor, so when I put on my angel investing hat, I actually never look for experience in the industry somebody is trying to disrupt. I look for experience in their team. And this is a personal choice, but I would prioritize a disruptor over an expert, as long as that disruptor has the ability to rope in experts, listen to them, and work with them. So it has the ability to build a team that understands what good is.
Got you. Yeah, that's true, right? Because the job of a CEO is essentially to hire the right people in the room, right?
Correct.
And kind of have the vision and go in the direction. I would say that's pretty fair. And then next thing I wanted to cover is like Pixelmon itself. It's going to be a mobile game and desktop game. Is that how people are going to consume or play the game?
Correct.
Okay. And from my research, it's mobile is like pretty much makes the most money in terms of gaming, right? Is that like strategic opportunity where you're like, we're just trying to get mass adoption? Or
I think there's a lot of reasons for mobile. It's a bigger market, or at least it's going to be a bigger market. It's a bigger market by headcount. It's slightly still smaller by revenues, but it's going to become bigger. So the speed of growth is faster. Second, pro gamers in PC world, and particularly the custom build world, tend to be very opinionated. That's not a bad thing per se, but that does mean that they have more barriers to adoption of Web3 games versus mobile gamers.
Okay.
It's going to be much harder for you to port over super engaged Twitch custom build desktop gamer to an NFT game than it is to bring over somebody who plays on mobile even 5-6 hours a day. It's again a case of just studying the demographics and what are the demographics you can get now and can get fast enough. And then third, it goes down to principles of blockchain and the protocols and digital currencies, whereby I actually believe that the first wave of blockchain adoption was very much coming from developed markets, from developers and investors. User and functional waves, I think, will come earlier from developing markets, mainly because there's less trust in their fiat currencies than a US citizen or a EU citizen might have. So I also believe that crypto adoption will be faster in developing markets in the next 5 years than in developed markets.
I see, because they would want to convert their country's currency into crypto.
Or they won't just keep their savings
somewhere safe.
Because there's probably more stability right now, even with the drop in some of the digital currencies than in some of the emerging markets, inflationary currencies.
Got you. Okay. So if you're going to target, let's say, mobile first, right, and also desktop is available, one thing I'm curious about is the people that buy, let's say, a Pixelmon NFT, they may not always be the person that plays the game, right? So from your perspective to like build a sustainable business, is the whole goal to get average person to play your game and maybe they don't even know what an NFT is? Is that like the route?
Absolutely. Look, I think we need to be a free-to-play game with a custodial wallet setup such that you don't need a wallet to start playing. You just need an email or even a phone number. And we need to attract massive crowds to our game. And we don't need to see ourselves as somebody who monetizes existing Web3 users. We need to see ourselves as somebody who on-ramps new users to Web3 by creating a great Web3 game that monetizes itself to a Web2 user, that just jumps on it and discovers it's Web3 down the line once they learn to love it and once maybe they find and own a great asset in the game. So yes, we need to market this like a Web2 game. We need to have an onboarding funnel that is like a Web2 game. Everything in the front end needs to be 90% Web2 looking.
Okay.
The back-end experience and then potential add-on experiences on the front end are Web3.
Got you. Okay, so if you're doing like Web3 onboarding and you're getting massive people to come in, I'm guessing they're going to buy skins in the game and like buy different monsters. Is that like the monetization mechanism or?
Correct. So there is, and frankly, look, monetization is also, a project doesn't need to be in a hurry to monetize. The first thing we need to do is ensure that the game is fun. We have mass adoption to the game loops, and then that we are able to easily switch on monetization. And the easiest way to switch on monetization is, yes, cosmetics. So it shouldn't be pay to win. So we shouldn't give, let's say, ecosystem advantages through payment. We should give mainly cosmetics and experience advantages. So think of it as different skins for your trainer, different skins for your Pixelmon, faster ways of moving around the map, different passive abilities, more scenic animations in your attacks, a golden skin, a golden sword, etc., etc. So, and we wouldn't be reinventing the wheel, frankly, here. We would ultimately be applying what is already being applied very successfully by Web2 gaming companies.
Got you.
It's just that the asset you're buying is going to be a skin NFT that is going to have an IP NFT owner that actually takes a part of that IP yield above you.
Okay, I think this is where people need a little help to understand what that means. Like, what is IP NFT? What's the difference between that and a skin NFT?
Take the names as placeholders, but assume that right now what you see, what we're trading on the Ethereum protocol and through the Ethereum protocol on OpenSea, let's call them parent NFTs.
Okay.
The parent NFTs, let's take one of our creatures. I like to take Borg. It's a little red devil.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I think around 100 owners of Borg NFTs. Think of those as 100 parent NFTs, each of which owns 1% claim to Borg as an IP.
Each one owns 1%.
Yeah, there's 100 owners. So each NFT is a fractionalized ownership of 1% over the 100.
Got it. Okay.
Because each of our species, Borg is one of our species, has a defined number of owners, of NFTs essentially to it. And in the case of Borg, it's 100. Think about those 100 owners owning 1% of the Borg IP. Now, in the game, we release in-game NFTs. In-game NFTs will be a Web2 gamer paying $1.99 to buy a skin of Borg, paying $2.99 to give it a passive ability where it can jump higher, pack active ability, paying $5.99 to give it a golden skin color that differentiates it from the rest.
Okay.
And now think about all of those micro revenue opportunities fueling a staking pool to which the 100 Borg parent NFT holders can participate by staking and receiving yield. Now, in essence, the 100 are IP owners. Yeah. Everybody else is just buying a clone, an in-game clone of it.
Okay, well, they're buying a skin, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
But the skin is an NFT by itself as well.
Okay.
Yeah, Patrick. So that's why I don't call it a skin NFT or a clone NFT.
Got it.
It's just a lower ranking NFT. It's a consequence of the IP NFTs. Essentially generates long-term yield that is proportional to game yield for the Borg owners, so for the parent NFT owners. But it also then opens the doors to user-generated content. What will make the game long-term successful? Constantly introducing new species and characters.
One second. Before we get into the user-generated content, I want to make sure the audience understands this because it's quite a new concept, right? So let's say I'm a player, right? Average player playing on my phone. I got a trainer. I go out, I fight some battles, and I first capture a Borg. Like I gotta capture and put it on my team, right? So that character, is that an NFT? Like the monster?
It's an NFT, but 99.9% of times it will be a skin NFT.
Okay, so I just captured a skin NFT in the wild, and now it's in my backpack or whatever, right?
Correct.
And then now, anytime I spend money to upgrade cosmetically or give some kind of passive ability to this character, this monster, you call it a skin NFT, connects to the parent NFT, and all those parents, they financially benefit in some way, or they get something for staking, depending on how many people want to upgrade their Borgs.
Correct. With one expansion to that, you'll also be able to trade your skin NFTs, and when you trade them, there will be a platform transaction from the in-game marketplace. That platform transaction will also go back to the parent NFT holders. Like with every skin, you can find it or you can buy it. So you'll also be able to buy skin NFT from the primary market in the game.
Oh, I see.
So
I see.
imagine it like buying a loot box, and inside of it there is a skin NFT of Borg.
I see. So you should be able to sell it as well, right?
Correct.
I see. So if someone were to make the most money, they'll be like, all right, like what characters or monsters are people upgrading the most? And then they're just going to buy a bunch of those. That's the idea, right?
Correct. Which is going to be the most loved character.
Exactly. So, okay, I can see that. I could definitely see that. So now let's talk about user-generated content, right? So we have the Pixelmons that you guys are creating, and then, you're going to have these out in the wild. People can catch it and evolve it. So with user-generated content, is it that you want other people, like just outside of your studios and stuff, to create monsters and put it in the game? Or
Correct. Think about Roblox creator tools. The way Roblox works, I mean, there's many ways it works, but one of the ways it works is that it lets creators create assets. When they're used, those creators get a part of the yield for those assets when they're used by other players.
Okay.
Now, we're going to do something very similar, but at a larger scale, and using NFTs and decentralized ownership, basically system, rather than a centralized one. Imagine you own a 3D studio, or imagine you are a 3D artist on Upwork with a friend that is a 3D rigger. You guys, or you're a professor running a class in 3D animation rigging and modeling.
Okay.
You prepare a new species for Pixelmon. You submit it to the DAO. If the DAO and our art director from a technical spec standpoint approves it, then that species is added to the game. When it is added to the game, a certain number of IP NFTs, so mother NFT or parent NFTs, are minted. Those, a portion is held by the DAO, a portion goes back to the creator. Once that asset starts getting used in game, that creator receives yield for his creations or can resell them and monetize his creations.
Okay.
So you're in essence creating a creator economy where the benefit for the creator is directly proportional to the success of his creation in the game. This is equivalent to what YouTube does with videos, but it's decentralized because now you can actually sell the royalty or a fraction of the royalties to your YouTube videos because they are NFTs themselves.
Let me make sure I got this, right? So let's say I'm a student and I do 3D and I got some friends also do some 3D stuff. We're like, yo, let's make some stuff for Pixelmon. So we come up with these cool monsters, original stuff. We submit it to the DAO. DAO says, looks great. Let's move it to the technical director. Technical guy's like, yep, looks good. It's going to work. So now my monster that I created with my friends is in the Pixelmon game, right? Now it's in the game. People are going to catch it and train it, whatever. And they're going to buy skins for my monster. And I'm guessing I would also make the skins too, or?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
The skins, given that they are variations and they are a constant process, could be done by yourself, but there will also be monetization teams that will focus on it. And a lot of the skins will be passive, no? For example, the passive ability of resisting water attacks by 10% more. That's just a line of code.
Got it. Okay. So somehow there's skins and things. Okay. And then every time somebody spends money on that monster that I created, I get some kind of kickback from that because I was the original creator.
Correct.
So this is how it works, right? So ideally, if people are making money, other people will also see that and they'll be like, hey, I want to make Pixelmon monsters too. Is that like the idea?
Correct. With one layer more to it. So what you've described is a centralized system, no? So it's a little bit like when you publish your own video on YouTube, you get paid based on how many views there are. The difference, so the extra layer here is that your ownership over the yield of that video will be represented by a certain number of IP NFTs that you own. So you can sit and you can keep them and keep receiving the yield, or you can actually sell them.
Oh, the rights to the yield.
Correct.
Oh,
you could decide to keep, let's say we mint 50, you could decide to keep 10 and maintain 20% rights to your yield, but sell the other 40 up front, bag the money up front and de-risk yourself. So in essence, that's the key difference. It's decentralized and the IP is tradable in itself.
Oh, interesting. So you can sell the IP. So there would probably be people just buying up IPs that they think potentially can do
or
something.
Investing in IP that they want. So I could go to Patrick and say, I know you're a great 3D artist. I will fund you to create elements in the Pixelmon game.
I see. And then they would take all the risk of like if it actually makes money or not. Oh, that's interesting. So Pixelmon is not necessarily just a game because it's more like a platform for people to build on top of.
Yes, within a certain context, which is monster hunting and the lore. So as long as you're true to that world, so it makes internal sense to the storyline of that world, it's a platform to build upon.
I see. So it's a platform for, I guess, monster hunting kind of. Okay, that makes sense. Now, as we're actually wrapping up, we're close to an hour now, so we're gonna wrap up the interview. Like for you, is there any like final words that you would like to like share with the audience, or anything you want to get out as we go ahead and close over here?
No, I mean, oh yes, the key message that I like to get out there is Pixelmon got off to a rocky start. I would invite people to take a close look at what we're doing, what we're conceptualizing. We're building something very complex. We've got a big vision, our ambitious vision. You might ultimately believe in it long term or not, but I would invite everybody not to dismiss the project because of some pixelated art dropped on holders in February, which was changed within 2 months. I'm not minimizing that event. I'm sure that event hurt a lot of investors, but there's something different and innovative here that we're trying to do. If successful, it will help the concept of Web3 gaming, and it'll help investors and holders in terms of yield and results from that investment many times over. So that's the only thing that I'd invite people to look into. So go beyond the past and the surface and look into the kind of details that, thankfully, Patrick, you helped me walk through and explain.
Sure. All right. Well, you heard it, everybody. If you are interested in learning more about Pixelmon, check them out on Twitter, see what they got going on. Thank you for tuning in on the Parallax. And Giulio, man, I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick.